Section 44807 is really designed for one of three purposes. One is to allow unmanned aircraft over 55 pounds to fly. The second is to allow the aircraft to maybe carry a hazardous chemical. It could be an insecticide, it could be a fertilizer, a very common agricultural use. And the third method that you can use Section 44807 for, that's for package delivery. So when you think about having somebody come and drop that burrito or drop that pizza off at the front door, you're allowed to do that under 44807. So Section 44807 is a very, very formal process, and it's a very public process. And let me explain what I mean by that. So a company that's interested in getting a 44807 exemption has to follow a number of steps. The first thing they need to do is they need to apply to the Federal Aviation Administration for an exemption. And that process involves something called, inside baseball, the Federal Docket Management System. And all that means is that there's this large government database called the Docket Management System, where you're going to take your application and your request under 44807 to, maybe fly an airplane that weighs 65, 70 pounds. And you're going to publish that publicly. And you will put together a filing, and that's just a common way of calling a bunch of papers that say, this is how you're going to maintain the level of safety for your operations and perform safety procedures equivalent to those that are found in sections of the Federal Aviation regulations. And then, in this section, the public is allowed to comment on it. So just because Ken files a Section 44807 petition, that doesn't mean I'm going to get it automatically or only have the FAA review it. I'm going to have the public take a look at it as well. And they can obviously say one of two things. First, hey, that's a great idea, we support it. Or we really think that they're not going to do what they're talking about. And then finally, when the government makes a decision, hopefully yes, many times no, that decision is going to be publicly posted to the docket as well. So it's an end-to-end transparent process, and you probably ask yourself, why go through all of this? It's because 44807 represents operations that may have just a little bit higher level of risk than maybe something under Part 107. And so process-wise, it needs to be transparent so we understand what the FAA is doing and how it's ensuring the safety of the national airspace. How long does it take to start, finish, and complete the 44807 exemption process? Our data found some really interesting things, and it all depends, quite frankly, on whether or not your application was approved or disapproved. If your application was approved, if we looked at all the exemptions that we analyzed, you got your answer back in about 149 days. If it was denied, you got your answer back in about 180 days. So I suspect if you're at 160 days, you got to be scratching your head and thinking, well, hopefully the writing is not on the wall. But there really is this delineation that is just supported by data point after data point, that there's a difference in those results. There are shortcomings in the 44807 process. And the first one starts with, how did you prepare your application? Because there are two ways you can do that. You can hire a third party, and a third party can write your entire application from beginning to end and file it on the Federal Docket Management System. Or you can do it yourself. And what our data shows is, when you hire a third party, there's only a 5% chance that you're going to be rejected. If you do it yourself, you're pushing 35%. So who files matters, who writes matters, and I think that's an area that we need to do a little bit more research in and see why there's such a disparity. The other thing is that when you look at how long it takes to get that answer back, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's 149 days or 180 days, those two time periods don't align with industry development cycles. What we are seeing is that unmanned aircraft manufacturers are able to turn successive generations of vehicles for flight testing in relative short order. much faster than 149 days, much faster than 180 days. And the way this affects flight testing is this. Every time you change your vehicle, you need to start the process all over again, almost literally from step one. And so you have a regulatory process that doesn't align with how quickly the industry can move, and as a result, there's a lot of frustration on both sides. And we need to figure out how to work on that. We need to solve that one. Another shortcoming of the 44807 process involves third-party preparation. Third-party preparation, that's created a cottage industry around putting out exemption requests. And what that has created within the industry is a perception that some of these third parties may have better access to the FAA decision makers than others, or certainly individuals. And the perception is, if I don't use a third party, I'm not going to get the same kind of fair shot as someone who does. And I think that kind of shakes the confidence in some operators who might otherwise prepare their own exemption request and file it. And it's something that we need to look at. It's something that the data shows, and we think the FAA needs to look at solving that. We've also seen in 44807 that there are a lot of cookie cutter exemptions being requested. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you realize that the FARs, the Federal Aviation Regulations, are based on manned aircraft, a lot of translation needs to be done. So manned aircraft have seatbelts. Manned aircraft have pilot manuals. Manned aircraft even have landing gear. And unmanned aircraft, many of them don't. And because of that, there are pro forma requests that an applicant often makes to ask the FAA to hold them exempt from having to have a logbook on board. And those are granted, but that's an administrative burden. And the data shows that there are 15 categories of these types of exemptions that are granted nearly 100% of the time. And what that suggests to us is that there needs to be a mechanism where commonly requested cookie cutter, fully administrative requests are taken outside of the regular evaluation process so that they can be approved with a blanket exemption, or they can be approved en masse, because we don't think you need to look at every single one of those requests. That just translates one regulation to another individually. And we think you can do it by groups, and that's what our data shows.